We'll be continuing to take a look at the profound verses in the Song of Solomon. Today we'll be looking at the Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Before we begin, I want to remind you that on the surface, the Song of Solomon is the love story between a slave woman and the king. But at the very core, it's about our love story with Jesus. And so, keeping this in mind, we begin here in verse 8, which says, "The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle, or like a young stag. Behold, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice." So, on the surface, what is she saying? On the physical plane, what is she saying? She's saying that the king, her beloved, is one who overcomes obstacles in life. She says that her beloved is one who's leaping over the mountains and bounding over the hills like a gazelle or a young stag. Now, these mountains, the name for the mountains here is Bethar or Bether. What this literally means is the mountains of separation, right? But these mountains, whose sole purpose is to separate, these formidable foes are nothing for her beloved. Her beloved is one who is like a gazelle or a young stag leaping over the mountains. Okay? But notice, even though he overcomes these mountains of separation, even though he just leaps over these mountains, he stands behind the wall and he gazes through the window. Now, what she's saying here, she's not saying that her beloved is a creep, okay? What she's saying is that her beloved understands boundaries. Even though he leaped over these mountains, he stands behind the wall. Even though he overcame the separation, he gazes through the window. And even though he conquered the hills of Bethar, he stands at the lattice and waits. Well, waits for what? Waits for her to let him in. And so now, let's turn away from the physical and let's look at the spiritual. Let's turn away from their relationship and look at our relationship with Jesus. I want to read this again. I want you to keep Jesus in your mind. "The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or like a young stag. Behold, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice." Jesus also conquered the hills of Bethar, the hills of separation. What separated us from God? It was our sin. Jesus conquered our sin on the cross. Jesus, being all powerful, destroyed sin and its consequences on the cross. You see, now he has the free gift of salvation. But he doesn't force that free gift of salvation down our throats. He gives us a free will as to whether or not we want to accept that or not. He stands at the wall, he stands at the window, he stands at the lattice and waits. The book of Revelation says Jesus knocks at the door. Jesus is a gentleman. You see, and I believe you understand this, that Jesus isn't a creep. Jesus isn't going to force us to love him. Instead, what does Jesus do? He proposes. He gives us a choice. He gets down on one knee. He looks up to you. And he asks you if you want to spend eternity with him. The choice is completely up to you. He doesn't force you, but he gives you a clear choice. Jesus, even though he overcame sin, overcame death, he waits outside of the wall that you've put up, the wall that I've put up, the wall that keeps him out. And he just waits for us to let him in. Jesus is a gentleman. And so in this video, I just wanted to remind you that when Jesus looks at you, he doesn't look at you like you're some dirty rat, some punk, some thief, some scoundrel. He looks at you as who you are, his first love.